Isaiah 5:20 says, "Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter."
Isaiah
5:20.
5:20, okay. Thank you.
Isaiah 5:20. How many examples can we come up with today where evil is called good and good is called evil? Here's an example. It is talking to a counselor in a Christian school. I learned that counseling gays not to become gay is unethical in all 50 states and illegal in some of them. What laws are there against telling a straight person who feels a little gay or something, yeah, go in that direction? Ever think of that?
Yeah.
What do they call that? Transition therapy? I think they call it transition therapy. Okay, you're gay and you don't want to be. Here's how to get back to being the way you were. Unethical all over the country, illegal in several states. I don't know exactly what the numbers are today. This was years ago. Biden, our president, picked a transgender woman, Rachel Levine, as assistant health secretary. You can't make this up. I used to be a fan of Mad Magazine. They couldn't have come up with anything that crazy back in my day.
I think somebody called him Woman of the Year.
It is unbelievable. Assistant health secretary, every nucleated cell in your body says you are a man. Now I say nucleated cells because red blood cells don't have nuclei. But you're going to pretend you're a woman? Or vice versa for some people. It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
And you're calling evil good. And then when you tell someone it's wrong, which is a good thing to do, someone calls that evil.
Yeah.
Isaiah 3:12. As for my people, children, actually if you want to turn there, I'll give you a minute. Isaiah 3:12. As for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, they which lead thee cause thee to err and destroy the way of thy paths. I'm going to leave the women aside for a minute. Some people think that women should not hold political office. Children are their oppressors. Greta Thunberg's speech at the UN Climate Action Summit, her 7th sentence was, "You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. You have got to be kidding me." You lose your parents in Ukraine. You lose your parents to drug addiction or prison or death here in the United States. I can see someone saying, my childhood has been taken from me, my dreams are gone. That's obvious.
Yeah.
Someone as entitled as she is, who sails over here, no, her dreams have been stolen. My childhood has been stolen. Maybe your dreams, because you can dream all kinds of things. Her childhood has not been stolen. She was 16 years old at the time. She's been nominated 4 times for the Nobel Peace Prize, which is obviously a political favor when you consider who gets it and why. Now, a Nobel Prize in medicine or physiology or economics, okay, I respect that. Maybe economics. There have been people with very opposing viewpoints who have received Nobel Prizes in economics. But this is incredible. This 16-year-old girl dresses down the UN You can't make this up.
No, you can't.
Now, her fourth sentence is, I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yes, Greta, I agree with you. You should be back in Stockholm, Sweden, going to school, instead of talking to the UN.
Yeah.
I heard a preacher say that the UN isn't really that big a problem because they're a bunch of incompetents. You know something? I agree. There's another organization that's much more dangerous that's springing up there now. Their logo is the Tower of Babel, and they believe that national government, nationalism, those are just dead ideas. He says that that's the ones you got to watch out for. I forget the name of the organization. But the UN. Wow. 1 Corinthians 15:56. The sting of death is sin, and the strength of sin is the law. Where did the mob gain its power, or when? During Prohibition. We legalized something that certainly had its bad effects on a lot of people, but should not have been illegalized. We have this idea, get tough on crime. President after president, we're going to get tough on crime. So the U.S. now has more people incarcerated than any other nation, and more people per capita than any other nation. In other words, for every 100,000, how many there are in jail or prison? The U.S. tops them all. Typically on drugs. I work in a prison. I've been told that over half the people are there on drug charges, not even necessarily violence. And considering what I have to do with my reports, yeah, that's easy to see. We've illegalized drugs, which maybe should be illegal, but we're getting tough on crime, and it's not doing any good.
Yeah.
It's not doing any, it's not working. Now, for more depth, the United States was founded, they say, on Christian principles. To a large extent, it was, but also a whitewashed view of Athenian democracy. You know, we get voting, which actually originally was white male landowners. Blacks couldn't vote, women couldn't vote. American Indians were considered different nations. But basically it's a combination, because they would have had a classical education back in those days anyway. No wonder slavery lasted so long in our country. The Romans kept slaves, the Greeks had slaves. That was their education. Why shouldn't we? But we did have a lot of Bible in there. What kind of Bible did we have? What did we emphasize, in other words? Hebrew republicanism. Think Reverend Witherspoon. That was a big idea back then. We were trying to found, or our forefathers were trying to found a Hebrew republic based on the Bible. You could see that coming out again 40 years ago. When churches who said, we're going to keep out of politics, we're just going to preach the gospel, that's what the Bible said, some of those churches started diversifying their emphasis.
Oh, man.
Under Jerry Falwell, for instance, as he galvanized the evangelical churches in the U.S. in a certain political direction. I'm not saying it's good, I'm not saying it's bad, but pastors who had never seen the inside of a college classroom, never taken a college history class, became overnight experts on U.S. history. Why? Because they parroted what they read and what they heard. I call it the gospel of the kingdom of the United States of America. And to a large extent, it's what our founding fathers envisioned. Here's the problem. When I was 16 years old, My father used to be able to get me jobs overseas. He'd come back from a business trip, he'd give me 2 years in a row in high school, he gave me choice. You can work in this country or in that country this summer if you want. I also had the choice of going to Israel with a local group. And I also had other choices like staying at home, being a counselor in training, working other jobs. I went to Germany that summer. Picked it over Venezuela, picked it over Israel. Why go to Israel with a bunch of locals? And that was a 7-week trip, by the way, that they made to Israel. I had a choice. I got there. Actually, I spent a week with my father in Holland. He was on business, and then a German friend picked us up and drove us to Germany. And then my father left. And this German friend brought me to a textile mill and a leather tannery. I hate bad smells, so I didn't like, I hate noise, so I didn't like the textile mill. I can handle smells. So I picked the leather tannery, which smelled, but at least it wasn't noisy. I didn't know this, but they were paying me child's wages as a 16-year-old American boy. Partway through the summer, I get called into an office. But these two brothers owned the company. One of them's telling me, we are paying you child's wages and we've seen your work. Now he could speak English, but I guess he didn't know the word retroactive. He was telling me, without using the word, we're going to retroactively pay you adults' wages, which is just what they did. But it wasn't, they weren't paying me every week. I was staying with a family. I had, food and shelter, and a couple of times during the summer they paid me. So I got a retroactive raise in Germany. The family I was staying with, the father was a leather technician. He offered to put me free through leather school. I politely turned it down. I wanted to go back, finish high school, and I thought I was going to medical school at some point. What a difference. There's a neat book I've got at home. Why America Doesn't Work. When you think of the authors, Jack Eckert, as in Eckert Drugstores, Chuck Colson, Watergate burglar, Colson, prison ministries. These are guys with real experience in life, not just some local yahoo complaining. Talked about going to Russia and seeing the depression in the streets and visiting the Russian prisons, as brutal as they were, and seeing the people happier. Why was that? Because the people in the prisons, they could make money on what they were doing. That was why. They had goals, they had productive, meaningful labor, which resulted in some benefit to them. It's a great book to read. But one of the problems they mention is that Americans don't listen to their inferiors. It's top-down leadership in the US. By the way, you know why the Israelis have so many startups? Because you have to get, when you're 18 years old in Israel, even if you're a woman, you get drafted into the army. Now, their army includes Army, Navy, and Air Force. They call it the Army, but this, that it's all three. You go in for 2 or 3 years. I think men, it's 2 years and 8 months. Women, it's 2 years. Then you get reserve duty every year after that. Now, if you're a woman, at least when I was there, that ended if you were 26 or married, whichever came first. You could stop your reserve duty. Men, they even had old men's units. But you get all this, and in Israel, unlike the US, we might be fighting a war on different fronts, so it has to be top-down leadership. And in the Israeli battlefield, you learn to make decisions right then and there. It's one of the reasons they're so good at startups. Their military culture, you don't salute, you don't call your commanding officer by his, you do call him by his first name. Very egalitarian society. A lot of respect for other people, which you wouldn't always know because they were very blunt, in-your-face people. You want to see more of that, go up to New York, go up to Boston. See not only the Jews up there, and I'm Jewish, so I'm not running down Jews, it's just see the Yankee mentality, what I've had to watch out for living in the South. I mean, it's just this in your face, that's that mindset, the way of doing things. And there was such respect shown to me. I mean, in America, it's not like that. You don't listen to your inferiors. So Putt's Law says something like, it's named after a fictitious person, Archibald Putt, and it's a book. But technology is dominated by people who don't manage what they're doing and managers who don't know what they're managing. It goes something like that. In other words, the boss doesn't really know the details of your technology, and the people doing the technology aren't in charge. Welcome to the USA. We had a battle, we had a war in the 1860s about slavery. What Americans don't realize, we're still a slave nation. It's like my wife calls it, a plantation mentality.
Mm-hmm.
In the Israeli kibbutz, a kibbutz is a communal settlement. Now they're getting away from their communism now. Most kibbutzim, that's the plural, are covenanted communities. There are 270 in the U.S., in Israel. But they started out, I mean, you join the kibbutz, you turn in all your clothing. And every week you'd go to a storeroom and here's what you need for the week. By the time I was there, you did put numbers on your clothes. And, they were washed. They had communal washing. You ate in a common cafeteria. And I remember, especially the second time, when the blue jeans were such a hot item and likely to be stolen, they had jeans day. You had to guard the jeans. I remember buying Israeli-made jeans for about $25, and this was 1978, and it started falling apart on me after about 2 weeks. Like, we used to have rivets in the back pockets, I guess from the days when they actually made jeans originally. It was for gold diggers, so you fill up your pockets with gold. And they didn't have rivets, and they started coming apart. But actually, Israel's pretty good now. They're very high tech, more so than we are. This was a long time ago. But my experience on the kibbutz, money didn't matter. They never talked about it. They had meetings at night. They decided who's going to work where the next day. This is how the kibbutz started. The Ganya was the first kibbutz in the early 1900s, up by the Sea of Galilee. And my experience there was, of course you had bosses that knew. If you're working with the chicken coops, you had to have someone that understood the chickens. You're working with the cows, someone had to understand the cows. But it was a very egalitarian type society. And your needs were met. You didn't own a car. You could borrow one from the kibbutz. You could sign up for it. Now these days they tend to own their own cars and houses in most of the kibbutzim, but this was a while ago. They weren't, now when May Day came around, they flew the Israeli flag plus the red flag of Marxism. Because Israel was founded by people, for the most part, who weren't religious, but were very, very secularized, socialists, communists, coming from places like Russia and Poland, and establishing a very socialistic country originally. Now they're getting away from that. But even if you wanted to go to college, you were a kibbutz member, which I wasn't. You'd argue. You'd argue your way into college. If this kibbutz sends me, like I work in the children's houses, children were raised communally. Now they're getting away from that too. I work in the children's houses. So, if you send me to college for 2 years, I promise you 2 years of service. In other words, I'm not going to quit this kibbutz for another 2 years. Well, no, we can't afford to send you this year. So the next year you come back. Last year you denied me. I think it's my turn. Okay, the most argumentative people in the face of the earth are the Jews. That's not an anti-Semitic comment. I am a Jew. And I am so argumentative at times, I gotta watch myself. It's part of our makeup. You go to Israel, you're gonna see so much of it. Again, try New York, Boston. But it was not this top. See, the thing is, you don't have a rich guy at the top making the money. Even your boss. You know, in America, it's like the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. We've got a slave state to some extent. People might get mad at that. I've worked in other countries. I've seen where it's not like that. Germany and Israel, for example. What's the church's main mission?
Go out.
Go.
Go out and seek others to come to Jesus. Go out and make disciples.
Yeah. Teach nations in Matthew. Of course, Matthew's written for the Jews who love to be teachers and students. Go out, preach the gospel, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, or Holy Spirit, however you want to translate that. And it's just a matter of translation. That's our mission. Anything that gets in the way of that mission, be very careful of.
Yeah.
Galatians 3:24. See, 40 years ago, a church maybe wasn't divided over politics, but it started going that way. You're expected in a church to believe what the denomination believes. Now, you might have had to start thinking, what does my pastor think politically? Or else, you're a rebel, you're disloyal. And most of what was taught from the pulpits back then about politics, a lot of it was simply, well, someone said it in the last sermon. Here's a newsletter. You're running for office. You're a Christian. The newsletter comes out. Don't vote for him, for you. Because you're not going to win. And you're going to take votes away from a more conservative candidate who is not a Christian, but at least he's going to win. Get him saved, baptized, and registered to vote. We're not trying to put a born-again Christian in the White House. We're trying to get one out. Do you see the problem?
Yeah.
Wherefore, Galatians 3:24, the law was our schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ that we might be justified by faith. Two views of the schoolmaster. One is that he's a Roman slave, and he brings the student to school, but he doesn't teach him. But he might help him with homework later that night. Another view is that he's literally the teacher. Either way, he's involved with education. Here's our problem. With all the talk about covenantal unity, which the book of Hebrews destroys, we don't understand that the Old Testament was written for people who were being treated like kids. The New Testament is for people who are being treated like adults. We do have a different relationship with God. There was no new birth before the ascension of Jesus. He said that in John. The Holy Spirit is going to come when I go up to the Father. Some people teach that that's Reformed theology. Well, the church started in the garden. They conflate a lot. And even the Old Testament saints were born again. No. You say, what did Jesus say to Nicodemus? You must be born again. But that new birth didn't take effect until a couple of years later. Jesus would say things that were going to happen after the ascension. And Nicodemus was supposed to understand it, but he would have known stuff like out of Jeremiah that there's going to be a new covenant. He should have known that. Nicodemus could not have been born again at that time. He didn't have the chance. The ascension had not yet happened. You got to watch it in the Bible. Sometimes Jesus says things that aren't really going to start until after his crucifixion resurrection, and ascension. We have a different relationship with God. We're not kids, we're adults. The Old Testament saints, in some ways, were like kids. That's how they were treated. It was fear. I'll tell you how fear works. And it can be a good thing for kids. Here I am in 7th grade. 4 public elementary schools were funneling into what we call junior high school. They had no middle school back in those days. It was called junior high school. My graduating class, I think, was 259. So let's round it to 250 and say grade 7, 8, 9 in one school, let's say 750 students. The boys in the cafeteria line up and go through one line and the girls through another. They're fed in out of different, one cafeteria like this. Boys go in one line, girls go through another and get served by different women. And they sit on opposite sides of the cafeteria. A bell would ring automatically. Everyone would stand up at their tables, long tables. The vice principal would, in total silence, the vice principal, 750 students would come down one by one. Okay, this table, pick up that milk carton. Okay, you may go. Pick up that napkin, you may go. 5 days a week. Someone did it for the girls. One day I'm talking, my best friend is just to my right, and I say a few words to him. There's no way the principal could have heard. He was on the other end of the cafeteria. You, get up under that clock. So I'm under a clock, whereas if I'm standing under the clock, the girls would have been on the right, the boys on the left, including the food lines, even where they were fed. Everyone knew what was going on that was still there, which is most of the school. After everyone's dismissed, he takes down my name and I get an hour's detention. I learned to behave. If you missed a wastebasket, he threw something in the wastebasket and missed. In 7th grade world geography class, that was an hour's detention and you got it. If you got detention in that class, someone could say, well, I got altar boy training today. Okay, you're coming to detention tomorrow. They gave you that break. So when someone went to throw something, the whole class would look. My behavior in elementary school was terrible. I pity anyone that had me, any teacher. By the time 7th grade rolled around, I'd learned a few lessons. So my parents went to open house, talked to my homeroom teacher, how's Howard? Oh, he's a very good boy, and blah, blah, blah. No, Howard Merkin. They thought, because I wasn't the only Howard in my class, by the way. They thought my teacher had the wrong Howard. I learned in a hurry. You know why? Because who wants an hour's detention? It works for kids. And I taught Christian school for 10 and a half years. And the Christian school behavior stinks. It's terrible. The kids are in control often. Kid does something, you talk to the principal believes the kid and not you. It is unbelievable. Now, classical Christian schools push good behavior, but they don't understand STEM. I have the kids learn Latin for 8 years instead of something that they can use outside the Vatican like Spanish. It's a wrong emphasis. It's majoring in minors at times with the classical Christian schools, but at least they seem to push for good behavior. Some of these other schools, it depends. I have visited other schools, sometimes the kids behave very well. But when you're in a school where they don't care to impose discipline, it usually has to do with money. One parent gets mad at you, if they pull their kid out, they're going to pull out the kid's brother and sister too, and that's a lot of tuition money walking out the door. I think that's what it is. Of course, the public schools have the same issue, so it's probably more than that. Get online, Google, I would love to teach, but there's an article in the Washington Post that's still online, and that's the public school. Incredible how bad it is. What are we doing? We're treating the kids like adults and the adults like kids. 1 Timothy 6:10. For the love of money is the root of all evil. That's an illusion, by the way. Now, not illusion like optical illusion, but an allusion, A-L-L. You take something and you allude to it. Diogenes the Cynic said, love of money is the marketplace of all evil.
Yeah.
By the way, Paul keeps, he quotes Aristotle, wretched man that I am. That's Aristotle. Aristotle had some essay and it appears 7 times. Paul quoted Greek philosophers. The New Testament quotes pseudepigrapha, quotes or at least alludes to the Apocrypha. Love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. That's what's going on in Christian schools now. It's not that they want to become rich, but they'll compromise their values to keep students. Try disciplining an athlete. You'll see what I mean. No child left behind. That put the public schools under the stress of having to produce or lose money. Public schools weren't that interested in money until we decided to use the law, because the strength of sin is the law. So it just got, trying to fix the public schools, and if they didn't do well enough, you might shut them down. Became about money. What did you tell me? Some teacher told you every time you miss, we lose money. That's what the teacher told my wife. The U.S. justice system is based on punishment, retribution, and deterrence. Now, there's 2 views to criminal justice. That is punishment, retribution, and deterrence. This guy's too dangerous to let out on society. Well, we're going to make it so they don't want to go to prison. We're going to punish them. We're going to deter them. The other model of criminal justice is rehabilitation. You look at prisons in Germany, Finland, Denmark, Norway. You're looking at places where you're going to need a 2-year degree to even be a guard. You learn sociology, whatever. They're trying, now that's not necessarily every prison in every one of those countries, but they're looking at taking the prisoners and treating them very well as you can. Now, I understand. I work in a prison. I mean, we get people in the mental health pod. There's no way they should ever be let out in society. But when you're looking at a prison where at least half the people are there for drug violations, they can be helped. What they do in these other countries, they have conditions I've seen better than any college dorm I ever had. They're trying to make it as much like the outside as possible so they can transition into a normal lifestyle. I watch a lot of this on YouTube. One of them was a guy in prison in Germany for contract killing. And he's allowed to go out and come back. Sometimes they'll do that here, by the way. They'll put you in jail, like if you violate a restraining order against your wife and kids or something like that. You go to jail by night and you're allowed to work during the day. So that's nothing completely unique. When I was in Bible school, we had a guy that came to Bible school by day and had to go back to jail by night. But they look at that, and the recidivism, the rate of people returning to prison, is very low. Our rate of recidivism is something like 42%. Now, they did in California teach prison, and I guess they might still do. I mean, this was in the book, but it's an old book on Colson and Eckert's book, Why America Doesn't Work. They talk about all these prison programs and the jobs and how well the inmates do. And of course, what happens is the unions come against it, and politicians come against it. You're spending money on these guys. Yeah, well, it's cost you more to lock them up for 20 years than to lock them up for 5 and train them in a skill. But there's, we have this idea, this prison in California, and I don't know if they're still doing it, they're training people in deep sea diving, the inmates. Now, I'm sure maybe mental health pod inmates they don't do this with. They get out, 90% of them find work related to deep sea diving, such as inspecting bridges. 8% return to crime. You know what that tells me? That's the difference between the New and the Old Testament. The Old Testament, which didn't have jails, by the way, or didn't prescribe jails. Now, somebody can be kept in ward while, Moses seeks the mind of the Lord, but they didn't, some people, it was restitution or it was stoning. The Old Testament didn't really try to rehabilitate you. They tried to scare you. They treated you like kids. Here's the difference. And God's thundering from Mount Sinai, and the people are terrified. Look at the New Testament. Here's Jesus. He goes through Samaria, where the Jews didn't like to go. And people say, well, the Jews didn't like the Samaritans because the Samaritans were descendants of people that the Assyrians brought in after the Assyrian captivity, and they mixed with some local Jews, and so they were mixed race, and they actually had their own religion. They had their own Pentateuch, Torah, 5 books of Moses. It was more than that. The Samaritans had their own temple. In the 2nd century BC, John Hyrcanus I forcibly converted a bunch of them. He extended the borders of Israel. He forcibly converted a bunch of Edomites. That's how the Herod family, including Herod the Great's father, Antipater, they got into Judaism there was a forced conversion along the line. He destroyed the Samaritan temple. They still have sacrifices on Mount Gerizim. You can see them. I think our pastor saw one. I saw a picture in National Geographic. They don't have a temple anymore. They do have a group called the Samaritans. There had been war. People had been killed. So as Jesus is talking to a Samaritan woman, it's not just a racial issue. It is a military issue. It's bad blood. He does correct her on her theology and on her lifestyle. But notice the difference. He doesn't say, wait a minute, you've been married all these times. Maybe it's time for a stoning or something. There's a very different treatment of people in the New Testament than there is in the Old. The Old resembling how you treat kids. The New resembling how you treat adults. When you have a religious group that treats their adults like kids with a lot of legalism, what you're doing is you're mixing the two testaments in a way that you shouldn't be. Now, I understand typology, I understand covenantal unity, which does exist to some extent, not as much as Reformed believers would have you believe. Here's the thing. We have to learn to treat adults like adults. We are in the New Testament now. That's not a political gospel. What did Jesus say? Make Christian governments and forcibly convert people to Christianity. Now that's been done, but that's nothing Jesus or the apostles ever said. Christian nation? That's not in the Bible. That's something we came up with because we're mixing the covenants. And it has done some good for a lot of people, and it's also created a lot of violence. A whole lot of Jews died because of that idea. Think of Spain. Okay? Jews had their golden age of Sephardic Jewry when the Muslims were in control of Spain, because despite what you see going on now with these violent type of Islam, generally throughout history, when the Muslims have been in charge, despite a lot of massacres, they still have generally treated the Jews better than the Christians have. So the Jews are doing great in Spain, and then the Christians retake the country. Ferdinand and Isabella decide, you've all got to be Catholics. So some Jews converted. The Inquisition was set up not to target openly practicing Jews, but Jews who had converted to Christianity who were suspected of still practicing Judaism in secret. In Portugal, that was 1492. Jews were thrown out of Spain. 1496, a lot of them went to Portugal, or actually all around the Mediterranean. especially Turkey, the Balkans. Then, 1496, Portugal says, okay, next year you're going to have to leave if you're Jewish and you don't convert. So 1497, they were thrown out of Portugal. You know, none of that's biblical. It's happened in history. It's historical. That's not the message of the gospel at all. Luther, when the Jews wouldn't convert, he got frustrated. Wrote stuff like the Jews and their lies. Incredible, the stuff he wrote. You think he was Adolf Hitler. This is what happens when we mix covenants. We try to build some type of a Christian nation, a theocracy. And it has done some good to have Christian influence in government, etc., etc. I'm not saying it's all wrong. But what we're seeing is people, I mean, back in my days in Bible school, we were never treated like adults. In fact, you graduated, they could ordain you. You could have a church 1,000 miles away and you were still under that senior pastor. Now, typically a Baptist, you'd graduate the seminary, you're in equal standing with anyone in the seminary. There's even teachers here. You get your own church, you can come as a guest speaker. Our group, they never treated you like an adult. You were always under this one guy, no matter where in the world you were, ultimately. And they still have that type of leadership, even though he's dead and he's been replaced by another. The problem with that, it's the wrong testament. You don't call evil good, you don't call good evil, and you don't treat, we are adults in the New Testament. We should be treated like adults. Now, I understand our children should be treated differently, but we have an adult relationship with God. We do not have the child's relationship with God, which is what they had in the Old Testament. And we have to see that as we deal with other people. Any questions? Okay, again, have a great week. Father, give us all safety this week through the wet roads and just crazy driving and everything else. In Jesus' name, amen.